Mightyreacts, back with the reacts. On today's video, we got the entire history of money in football. As we know, back in the days, they didn't have a lot of money, so a lot of players wouldn't get big time money as the player as now. But some of these players as now, I feel like some of them get too much paid, and they're not playing so well to get that much pay. Sometimes I feel like if they give me 1 million, I can perform better as some of the player. Just saying. But hey man, this video is by Top Pins. So yes man, enough of the talking, let's react.
Money has dominated football for over 100 years. In the late 1800s, it was illegal for football players to be paid. By the 1960s, football players...
It was even illegal for these players to get paid. I didn't know about that, but that's crazy. And now they get overpaid. Some of them deserve it, but sheesh.
Became celebrities getting rich and famous, and now billions of dollars flow through the sport as football clubs and football players are worth as such as some small countries. So, from the world's first super team to the craziest purchases you will ever see, this is the entire history of money in football. Let's start from the 1870s, when the biggest scandal in the sport was a suspicion that a young Scottish football player was actually being paid to play for Darwin FC. You see, at the time, football was an amateur sport, and players were not allowed to receive wages or join other teams for transfer fees. And as a result, the teams who dominated at the time were the elite academic institutions whose players had the time, money, and freedom to play in the FA Cup as a leisurely activity. So, the only way clubs could compete for the best players was by handing them illegal contracts, and this is what brought Darwin FC all the way to the FA Cup quarterfinals. But despite crashing out, this contract was a watershed moment as many began to question why footballers were not allowed to be paid wages. Eventually, in 1885, the FA gave in to growing pressure from northern clubs like Darwin FC, Blackburn Rovers, and Blackburn Olympic, and finally decided to professionalize the game. This decision revolutionized the entire sport, as finally working-class players could afford to ditch their laboring jobs and commit full-time to football. And it was at this time when, believe it or not, Blackburn became the epicenter of world football, as its two football clubs dominated the FA Cup for the next 5 years. But nonetheless, the FA Cup winning heroes lived modest lives, earning an average wage of £2 to £3 per week, only slightly higher than what they'd have received for breaking their backs on the factory floor. But still, this was the...
Damn bro, back in the days, players would get £2 to £3 a week to play football. And as he just said, if they were keep working, they would get less than that. So that show you how money back in the days was value of, yeah, I said it right. But yes, so back in the days, those pounds were... Anyways, let's react to the video.
First sighting of what football could
Trying
really
to say
become.
something, but
by the 1920s, football had evolved from a small sport that a few thousand people would watch in the north of England to a global sensation. And this meant that the amount of money in the sport was climbing, and fast. I'm talking record wages, record transfer fees, and the world's first pay-to-win club. Professional leagues were being formed in Argentina, Uruguay, and Scotland, but still the big bucks remained in England, and this is when the world's first super team was formed. You see, despite attracting loud and vocal crowds that produced competitive revenue, Arsenal had still never won major silverware until the late 1920s, and as the fan base grew, they began to demand success, so the board decided to splash the cash. They started using the revenue they got from such high attendances to make signing after signing, most notably a world record transfer for David Jack from Bolton for £10,890 in 1928. Wow. Fans of rival clubs like Everton,
and he was given
Newcastle United, and Manchester City
old.
complained that Arsenal were attempting to buy the league. But maybe if they could look into the future, they'd have kept more quiet. And Arsenal's exuberant spending paid off, as they won the first division title on 4 occasions out of 5 between...
And imagine that... Sorry, this is delay reaction. But back in those times, 10,000 what was the world record transfer fee. Well, yes, that. But then now those players get those blood clot. those players get those weekly or more. Some of these players get 100K, 50K, 20K weekly. Yes.
1931 and 1935, establishing Arsenal as one of the biggest football clubs in the world. Elsewhere in the world of football, players were making overseas transfers for the first time in history, but with no televised football, sophisticated data analysis, or easily accessible long-distance travel, scouting foreign players was almost impossible. Still though, Argentine midfielder Luis Monti wowed in the 1928 Summer Olympics and 1930 World Cup finals and was included in FIFA's All-Star team for 1930, prompting Italian club Juventus to take a gamble on the tough-tackling prodigy they'd have known little about. Monti was arguably the world's first high-profile international transfer, and the 4 Serie A titles he won with the Old Lady is what ended up influencing the recruitment strategy of Real Madrid's early European Cup dominating team, but we'll get to that later. Despite this spending, the early 20th century was socially and economically a turbulent time. The period included 2 world wars and disrupted thousands of footballers, and the 1929 Great Depression limited the spending power of clubs. In addition to wider difficulties, footballers in England had a £4 wage cap placed on them and generally continued to live modest lives. Even one of the era's greatest players, Dixie Dean, worked various night jobs despite becoming one of the greatest goal scorers in England, and after retiring was forced to work in a betting shop in Liverpool just to get by. With teams like Arsenal, Aston Villa, and Chelsea drawing weekly crowds of upwards of 35,000, some footballers campaigned for the FA's wage cap to be removed, but their cries were to no avail. But very soon, this was all going to change as football was entering a new era. As World War II came to an end in the late 1940s, officials were eager to rebuild bridges through the sport the continent knew how to communicate through: football. And by 1955, the European Cup was formed, featuring giants from across Europe, including AC Milan, Sporting, and Real Madrid, to compete for continental glory. But while most of the teams in the competition recruited the best players
they did a great job right there to build the European Cup.
home nation, Real Madrid president Santiago Bernabeu had an ambitious strategy that involved scouting and poaching the best players from across Europe. Spanish dictator Francisco Franco viewed Real Madrid as a club that represented Spanish national identity and pride, so he poured thousands into Los Blancos to enable them to build a team of Galacticos that would become the envy of Europe. With Franco's cash injections and the revenue generated through Madrid's world-leading attendances, Bernabeu built an expensively assembled team of international greats, including Di Stefano and Hector Real from Argentina, Jose Santamaria from Uruguay, and Raymond Kopa from France, who'd win the first 5 European Cup trophies in a row. But Madrid's era of dominance wouldn't last forever, because by the early 1960s, clubs like Manchester United, Benfica, AC Milan, and Internazionale started spending more through the new commercial opportunities provided through televised football matches and globalized audiences. Even Tottenham Hotspur were spending money, as the London club broke the British transfer record by signing Jimmy Greaves for £99,999 in 1961 and won the...
Bro, it's still crazy to imagine those was the record fee, just 100K, and to think now these players get that weekly. Some of these players get the weekly 100K just like nothing, like, bro.
European Cup Winners' Cup the following season. Advertising boards were added along the perimeters of pitches, ticket prices and attendances boomed, with Liverpool and Manchester United's crowds now exceeding 50,000, and clubs began selling official club merchandise. And with all of football's new revenue streams, this finally forced the FA to abolish the wage cap, and the game's best players were suddenly viewed in a different light. Players like Johan Cruyff, Alfredo Di Stefano, and Pele were no longer working. They were globally admired superstars, earning wages that put them in a different stratosphere from the ordinary factory workers and tradesmen of the time. But now, as players were getting more and more famous and finally getting more and more rich, it was time for the rise of superstar football players. Players who were known as much off the pitch as they were on it. And this is where George Best entered the scene, the first of his kind, a footballing superstar. The dazzling Northern Ireland and Manchester United player dared to be different. He rebelled against the rhetoric that a footballer should be hard-working, disciplined, and understated, as he wore his shirt untucked, his socks rolled low, and strutted around the pitch. The 1968 European Cup winning superstar's charisma and on-field swagger elevated Best.
But back in the days, those was the I still play with my jersey tucked in, because I feel like those were bruh. Never mind, just let's keep reacting.
Into a household name as brands queued up to work with him, lifestyle magazines interviewed him, and Britain's biggest celebrities aimed to befriend him. Although the pitch was his arena, Best was a pop star who foreshadowed the lifestyle and finance-focused footballers of the 21st century. He would spend his entire salary on, in his words, booze, birds, and fast cars. And in 1973, Best opened a Manchester nightclub called Slack Alice, becoming among the first footballers to have earned a fortune so substantial from his playing days that he could afford to enter the world of business. In this time period, money continued to be the difference maker on the pitch too. Nottingham Forest were not a club accustomed to reaching the latter stages of major European competitions, but they won the European Cup in 1980 after signing Trevor Francis, who was the first ever million-pound player. Forest's European triumphs marked the beginning of a new era in football. The previous 8 European Cups had been won by powerhouses Liverpool, Bayern Munich, and Ajax, who relied on homegrown talent and cost-effective recruitment to conquer Europe. And football super clubs were furious that a seemingly inferior outfit could outspend them in the transfer market, and early discussions began to be held on how they can keep the big clubs big and prevent smaller clubs from breaking into the group, and this wouldn't be the last time these discussions took place. But despite their attempts to control wealth and power within football, the game's elite were left speechless when a talent so extraordinary that he could win a league on his own emerged out of nowhere: Diego Maradona. The Argentine winger was already considered the most promising youngster in world football as a teenager and joined Barcelona for Boca Juniors in 1982 for a record-breaking £5 million. But after a difficult couple of years at the Camp Nou, Maradona left Catalonia to join Napoli for another world record transfer fee of £6.9 million. Many question how Napoli, who were a less established and uncompetitive side,
Diego Maradona is a legend, and especially at Napoli,
from a working-class area of Italy, could afford and attract one of the world's most exclusive talents. The historic deal was financed through major local investment from banks and corporate backing, who viewed Maradona as an emblem of hope that could revitalize the local economy, and boy were they right. A local newspaper claimed that despite the lack of a mayor, houses, schools, buses, employment, and sanitation, none of this mattered because we have Maradona. The Argentine superstar's arrival placed Naples on the map, and while Maradona spent his estimated £1 million a year wages impulsively like a drug-fueled maniac, the Maverick produced on the pitch too. His time at Napoli saw the unfancied southern Italian club disrupt Serie A's traditional wealthy elite of Juventus, AC Milan, and Inter as he dragged the club to historic titles in 1987 and 1990. But it was at this point in history that the finances in football were about to change forever, with the financial boom of football coming into play all over Europe. Because in 1992, the English First Division rebranded as the Premier League and secured a staggering £304 million TV deal over its first 5 seasons. The rebranding was in response to the increased commercial presence and growing revenue streams within football, as players, shirts, stands, and stadiums received lucrative sponsorship deals. And a similar trend was happening on the continental stage as the European Cup rebranded to the Champions League in 1992, as the tournament reverted from a straight knockout where big clubs could be eliminated in the first round to a group stage and knockout that ensured every club played a minimum of 6 matches. The structural changes came from pressure from elite clubs like AC Milan, Manchester United, and Real Madrid, who wanted the tournament to become more marketable and include more matches to increase their revenue streams. The major European competition became less predictable, as the wealthy elite had more safety nets than during straight knockout fixtures through group stage matches and two-legged ties later in the tournament. Since the rebranding, a select group of 7 wealthy clubs have enjoyed the financial benefits of the competition, winning 28 of the 33 Champions League trophies, as unlikely European Cup winners like Red Star Belgrade, Steaua Bucharest, Hamburg, and Celtic have become a thing of the past. The greed and desire for protection from Europe's biggest sides only grew over the following 3 decades, but the story of the European Super League comes just a bit later. Through the 90s, transfer prices began to rise significantly, with world records being smashed almost every other year. In 1990, Roberto Baggio moved to Juventus for a world record of £8 million. In 1992, Gianluca Vialli followed him for a new world record of £12 million. In 1996, Alan Shearer smashed this with his £15 million move to Newcastle. In 1997, Ronaldo Nazario moved to Inter Milan for £19.5 million. And in 1999, Christian Vieri moved to Inter Milan for a record-shattering £32 million. Things were getting silly all over Europe. But looking back to England, due to a lack of financial regulation during the 90s, many teams were attempting to bridge the gap between the ordinary and the global powerhouse clubs, and Blackburn Rovers Rovers were the first of this kind to attempt to throw silly money around just to compete with bigger clubs. You see, Blackburn were financed by one of the richest men in Britain, Jack Walker, who poured millions into the Lancashire club to transform them from a mediocre second-tier side to Premier League champions in just 4 seasons. Walker's money attracted legendary manager Kenny Dalglish and elite talents like Alan Shearer, who signed for $3.6 million in 1992, and Chris Sutton, who joined for $5 million in 1994. At the time, Blackburn's 94-95 Premier League winning team was among the most expensively assembled squads in football history, creating a blueprint for teams to follow in the future. But not every team who tried this silly spending had the same result, because Leeds United had a total disaster. The Yorkshire club attempted to replicate Blackburn's reckless spending to land the big prizes by signing Rio Ferdinand for a British transfer record fee of £18 million, Robbie Keane for £12 million, and even Robbie Fowler for £11 million. And for a while, it looked like Leeds' gamble was going to pay off. They shot up the Premier League table, finishing inside the top 4 during 3 back-to-back seasons from 1998 to 2001, where they reached the semi-finals of the Champions League and looked well-placed to push on to become serious contenders for the biggest trophies. But unlike Blackburn, Leeds' erratic spending was financed through loans rather than through a generous investor, and the Elland Road side became reliant on Champions League money to keep the club above water. So in 2002, when Leeds disastrously failed to qualify for Champions League football, forcing them to sell key players, including Rio Ferdinand, Jonathan Woodgate, and Lee Boyer. And the club never recovered from the financial difficulties that ended up placing them in administration, and by 2007 had been relegated all the way down to England's 3rd tier. But during this time period, football clubs were not the only ones spending, because even the players started to spend, and I mean spend big. During the 90s, the highest weekly wage almost doubled every year throughout the decade. By 1999, Christian Vieri earned £85,000 per week, a total of 40 times more than what elite players were raking in during the late 80s. Ronaldo Nazario earned around £4 million a season through wages and endorsements with Nike after he signed for Barcelona in the late 90s, marking the beginning of the commercial superstar era of football. While previous greats like George Best and Diego Maradona were famous players, opportunities to earn generational wealth through major brand partnerships was limited. But as Nike grew to unprecedented heights throughout the 90s, the image and aesthetic of footballers like Ronaldo Nazario, Thierry Henry, and Edgar Davids became the gateway to multi-million-pound sponsorships. David Beckham was among the first to notice the connection between his appearance and brand opportunities away from the beautiful game, and turned himself into a lifestyle icon that attracted lucrative partnerships with Gillette, Armani, and Adidas Originals. The Englishman spent his estimated £10 to £15 million a year earnings during the early 90s on property, an army of luxury cars, investments, and business ventures that would go on to shape football in years to come. Beckham was probably the first footballing superstar that was actually clever about his money. He focused on building businesses as much as enjoying the luxury life, and this all paid off in the years to come. And as we entered the 2000s, Real Madrid saw the appeal of superstars like David Beckham, and for the first time in football, they became a club who focused on superstars off the pitch more than on it, with a goal of boosting commercial value placed above on-the-pitch performance. In the early 2000s, they put together what was known as the Galacticos, breaking the world record transfer 3 times in that decade as they sought to become a global brand as much as a football club. And seeing the brand value of football clubs rise, billionaires were looking at football clubs as investment opportunities to make a big return. And as Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich watched the empires of Blackburn Rovers and Leeds United rise and suddenly fall without lasting success, he wanted to create an investment strategy that would see his recently purchased club, Chelsea, become a mainstay among Europe's heavy hitters. So, while Leeds gambled on domestic and European success to finance their exuberant spending, Abramovich structured Chelsea's lofty transfer payments so that money was owed to him rather than an external firm. Chelsea spent freely under Abramovich's reign, attracting Champions League winning manager Jose Mourinho to oversee the most ambitious plan in football history, to turn an ordinary and underperforming club from West London into one of the most prestigious and profitable in Europe. During Mourinho's first
summer at Stamford Bridge, the
Portuguese mastermind signed Didier Drogba, Ricardo Carvalho, Paulo Ferreira, Arjen Robben, Thiago, Petr Cech, and Matea Kejman for a total sum of £90 million, helping Chelsea to win the Premier League in back-to-back seasons. Unlike Leeds and Blackburn, Chelsea put serious emphasis on generating additional revenue streams by marketing themselves to younger supporters and attracting a global audience who already watch the Premier League on TV. And like that, Chelsea were just one of dozens of clubs who were rapidly growing a large global fan base, with the likes of Manchester United, Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Bayern Munich utilizing their superstar status to attract supporters from America, Asia, and beyond, further increasing the disparity in wealth between themselves and the lesser-known teams in their leagues who had smaller domestic followings. After Chelsea's artificial rise from mid-table obscurity to Premier League dominance, there was a moral panic about the impacts of billionaire owners across Europe. So, when news broke that Sheikh Mansour was set to purchase Manchester City in 2008, there was uproar that another seemingly unthreatening side could become among Europe's most potent forces. Supporters of United, Liverpool, and Arsenal were right to be fearful of City's new money because the Manchester club would go on to achieve unimaginable greatness through their ridiculous spending over the coming years, winning 8 Premier League titles and a Champions League. But before City would go on to conquer England and Europe, other Middle East billionaires took inspiration from Sheikh Mansour's spending, and eventually the Qatar Sports Investment Group purchased PSG in 2011 for a modest £60 million. The Qatar Sports Group noticed a gap in the French market because despite the country having some of the most passionate football fans in the world and arguably the continent's greatest producer of elite-level talent, Ligue 1 lacked a world-class outfit that competed in the Champions League. Additionally, with Qatar being a small nation of little over 3 million residents, it had limited influence on global popular and sporting culture ahead of its controversial World Cup, which was due to be played in 10 years. So, the mega geopolitical project saw the Qatar Sports Group pump millions into PSG as they completely revolutionized football finance and, arguably, broke the transfer market. In 2017, PSG smashed the world transfer record by over £100 million as they signed Brazilian winger Neymar for an eye-watering $198 million before adding Kylian Mbappe to their ranks a few weeks later for $165 million. PSG signed the two international superstars with ambitions beyond domestic and European footballing supremacy, as the Parisians had a vision of becoming the most marketable club in the world, a global brand powerhouse that would reflect positively on the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund and the nation's international image. PSG won Ligue 1 title after Ligue 1 title, turning the Paris club into arguably football's biggest brand outside of sports culture. It became normalized for superstar figures unassociated with the beautiful game, like Kanye West and Rihanna, to rep the shirt, while Travis Scott and Michael Jordan even collabed with Nike and designed their own jerseys. As a result, PSG's yearly kit sales totaled 83 million by the early 2020s, the 6th highest in the world, and a figure that surpassed the revenues reported by historic clubs such as Arsenal, Juventus, and AC Milan. But whilst individual clubs like PSG were growing in wealth, the leagues as a whole were growing in inequality from the big and small teams across all of Europe. That being all but the Premier League, as their TV deal reached a jaw-dropping estimated £1.7 billion per season, enabling historically insignificant clubs like Bournemouth, Brighton, and Brentford to outspend former European conquering giants like Ajax, AC Milan, and Benfica in the transfer market. Clubs across the continent grew frustrated by the disparity of wealth between major European divisions and the Premier League. So the owners of Real Madrid and Juventus, among several other clubs, led a campaign to form an exclusive European Super League that would protect and drastically increase the profits of elite clubs. In the end, 12 teams from Spain, Italy, and England attempted to create a profit-driven breakaway competition that wouldn't include promotion or relegation, but after outrage from supporters, the plans were eventually revoked. After all, how could a Super League that featured Tottenham Hotspur as one of its founding members ever be taken seriously? Despite the Super League's failure, a league with equally ludicrous financial incentives associated with it became the talk of world football, the Saudi Pro League. The beautiful game had seen money pumped into obscure leagues before. The Chinese Super League of the late 2010s and the Russian Premier League of the late 2000s threatened to become forces lucrative enough to entice Europe's best players, but eventually crashed before establishing lasting appeal. But the Saudi Pro League was different. In December 2022, Al Hilal signed Cristiano Ronaldo on an estimated $172 million a season wage with an £86 million signing on.
Hey, do you guys remember? I think I saw they offer Kylian Mbappe $1 billion to play in Saudi Arabia, and just for 1 year or 2 years, something like that. Bro, I will take the money and come back and play in Europe.
On fee, shattering totals accumulated by his nemesis Lionel Messi. Ronaldo's Saudi Pro League arrival influenced several huge names, including Neymar, Karim Benzema, Sadio Mane, and N'Golo Kante to follow suit, earning yearly salaries unimaginable during the peak of their European careers. And
I think in Saudi Arabia, they don't even have taxes, I think.
The Saudi project is showing no sign of slowing down either. In 2025, Cristiano Ronaldo was awarded a new 2-year deal, reportedly worth £492 million over 2 seasons, making him the
Half a
highest-earning
billion,
football
bro.
player of all
God
time.
damn.
But what matters is what he does with that money, and he could surely take a look at what David Beckham has done over.
And bro, no taxes. All this money is yours. You don't have to give not half of it. Nothing. You can just spend it how you like. Bro, what would you do with all of those money? Obviously, you will save the money for the generation after you. But what would you spend on it?
The MLS, as he has used his status as a popular culture icon, wealth generated through his playing days, and, most importantly, his contract with LA Galaxy over a decade ago, allowing him to create the MLS franchise Inter Miami, who is now signed Lionel
shout out
Messi.
to David Beckham, bro. He made the league better and bigger.
And he's not the only player turned club owner, as almost every top-tier football player seems to be acquiring either a minority or majority stake in some football club or another, like Gerard Piqué, who acquired Andorra FC and who now play in the second tier of Spanish football. So far, we haven't seen any of the bigger clubs get bought out by players, but surely with the types of contracts Cristiano Ronaldo is receiving, we might be able to see a world where he'll be standing in the boardroom in any of his old clubs. Please let it be Manchester United for my sake. We need saving. But anyway, if you want to hear how Ronaldo made his way to the top of football and actually earn these types of contracts, you have to click on the video on screen now.
Hey, shout out to Top Bins. What a great video. Nice video. And obviously, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. See you guys on the next reaction. I'm gone.